Jake Martinez wiped the grease from his hands and looked at the old truck engine one more time. The clock on the garage wall showed almost midnight, but he did not mind working late. His small repair shop was quiet at this hour, and he could think. Better without customers asking when their cars would be ready. The radio played soft country music in the background while rain tapped against the metal roof. He reached for his coffee cup and took a sip of the cold liquid. His daughter Emma would be staying with his ex-wife Lisa this weekend, so he had plenty of time to finish the truck repairs. The engine belonged to old Pete, who lived down the road and could not afford to pay much. Jake did not care about the money. Pete was a good man who helped Jake when Emma was sick last winter. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Jake looked up at the ceiling. The storm was getting stronger, and he hoped the old roof would hold. He had been meaning to fix those loose panels for months, but never found the time. Lightning flashed outside the small window and lit up his tools hanging on the wall. Jake turned back to the engine and picked up his wrench. As he leaned over the truck, something bright streaked across the window. He thought it might be lightning, but the light was different. It moved in a straight line from east to west and seemed to be getting bigger. The light was silver and blue and made no sound at all. The mechanic stepped outside into the rain and looked up at the dark sky. The strange light was falling toward his garage and moving very fast. Jake realized it was not lightning or a plane, but something else entirely. He dove behind his truck just as the object crashed through his roof with a loud bang. Metal pieces and wood fell around him while dust filled the air. Jake coughed and stood up slowly. A hole the size of a basketball had been punched through his roof, and rainwater was already dripping onto his floor. In the middle of his garage sat a small silver ball about the size of a softball. Steam rose from its smooth surface, and strange blue lights blinked along its edge. Grabbed a flashlight and moved closer to examine the object. It looked like metal, but felt warm when he touched it. The blue lights pulsed faster, as if responding to his presence. Suddenly, the ball split open like a flower with 6 petals that folded back to reveal something impossible. Inside the ball sat a tiny person no bigger than his hand. The small being had silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the flashlight beam. Its head was larger than a human head should be, and 2 big black eyes stared up at Jake with obvious intelligence. The tiny creature wore what looked like a small blue jumpsuit and had 4 fingers on each hand instead of 5. Jake stumbled backward and knocked over his toolbox. Wrenches and screwdrivers scattered across the concrete floor, making a terrible noise. The small being did not seem afraid of the sound. Instead, it stood up inside its silver ball and raised one hand as if to say hello. The creature reached into its jumpsuit and pulled out something that looked like a tiny metal disc. It pressed the disc, and suddenly Jake could hear a voice speaking. Perfect English. The voice was high and musical like a child, but the words were very serious. "Please do not be afraid," the voice said, while the small being's mouth moved to match the words. "My name is Pip, and I come from very far away. My home is gone, and I am alone. I have traveled across the dark between stars to find you." Jake sat down heavily on an overturned bucket and stared at the impossible sight. A tiny alien was talking to him in his garage while rain poured through the hole in his roof. This had to be a dream wrought on by too much coffee and not enough sleep. "You are Jake Martinez," Pip continued while climbing out of the silver ball. "I have been listening to your voice signals for many days. You talk to someone called Father, but he does not answer back. This tells me you understand loss and loneliness." The mechanic found his voice at last. "How do you know my name and who I am?" Pip walked to the edge of his landing craft and sat down with his small legs hanging over the side. "Your radio in the truck sends signals into space when you talk. I heard you many times asking your father for advice about fixing engines and raising your daughter. Your father is gone, like my people are gone. Jake remembered all the times he had talked to his old CB radio late at night when he was working alone. He would tell his dead father about his problems and ask for guidance, even though no one could hear him. At least he thought no one could hear him. My species is called Velani, Pip explained while his translator device glowed softly. We lived on a world orbiting the star you call Kepler 442. A great machine sickness came to our planet and consumed everything. I was put in this escape pod and sent away to find safety among the stars. The tiny alien looked very sad as he spoke about his lost home. Jake felt sorry for him, despite the strangeness of the situation. What happened to your family? Pip tilted his small head, and his big eyes grew even larger. The translator device made several beeping sounds before the voice spoke again. I do not understand this word family. The machine in my head cannot find the right meaning. What is family? Jake was surprised by the question. How could anyone not know what family meant? Family means your parents and children and people who love you and take care of you. The translator beeped and hummed for a long time while Pip looked confused. Finally, the small voice spoke again with what sounded like sadness. My people do not have this thing you call family. We are made in great machines and raised by teaching. Computers. I have genetic patterns of possible parent figures stored in my memory, but no actual creators. The alien stood up and walked closer to Jake. This is why I came to find you, Jake Martinez. I heard you talking to your father figure, and I understood that you know how to be connected to another being. I need you to help me with something very important. Jake leaned forward to hear better, as Pip's small voice grew even more serious. Can you build me a dad? Jake stared at the tiny alien for several long seconds without speaking. The question hung in the air between them, like something solid he could touch. Build a dad. What did that even mean? He rubbed his tired eyes and wondered if he was losing his mind from working too many late nights alone in his garage. I don't understand what you're asking me to do, Jake finally said while Pip watched him with those large black eyes. How do you build a person? People aren't machines that you can put together with tools and parts. Pip climbed down from his silver craft and walked across the concrete floor toward Jake. His small feet made tiny tapping sounds that seemed very loud in the quiet garage. Among my people, the Velani, we do not grow inside other beings like humans do. We are assembled in great laboratories using genetic templates and memory patterns. A Velani child chooses personality traits from a database of possible parent figures, and those traits are combined to create a guardian. The alien stopped near Jake's boot and looked up at him. I have many template patterns stored in my memory core, but I do not have the machines needed to build a physical form. I thought perhaps human technology could be modified to help me create what I need. Jake picked up Pip very carefully and set him on the workbench where they could talk more easily. The tiny being weighed almost nothing and felt warm like a small bird. Even if I could help you build someone, I don't know anything about alien biology or genetics. I fix truck engines, not people. You have something more valuable than technical knowledge, Pip replied while his translator hummed softly. You understand. The emotional connections that bind beings together. You speak to your father figure, even though he cannot respond, because the bond between you exists beyond physical presence. Over the next 3 days, Jake tried to learn more about what Pip actually needed. The small alien showed him holographic recordings projected from his silver craft. The images revealed a world of crystal cities and floating platforms where silver-skinned beings lived in perfect harmony. But there were no families as Jake understood them. Velani were created as adults and spent their lives in work groups or research teams, but never formed the deep personal bonds that humans called love. We had efficiency and logic, Pip explained while showing scenes of Valani daily life. But we did not have the connections that make beings willing to sacrifice for each other. When the machine plague came to consume our world, no one fought to protect others. We simply calculated that resistance was impossible and waited for the end. Jake found himself growing attached to the small alien, despite the strangeness of their situation. Pip was curious about everything in the garage and asked endless questions about how human tools worked. The tiny being was fascinated by Jake's collection of family photos on the wall and wanted to hear stories about each person in the pictures. On Friday evening, Jake's ex-wife Lisa arrived to drop off Emma for the weekend. Jake quickly hid Pip inside an old coffee can and warned him to stay quiet. Lisa looked tired as she stood in the garage doorway and glanced around at the repair work. "You're working too hard again," she said, while Emma ran past her to hug Jake. "Emma tells me you've been staying up late every night this week." "Just trying to catch up on some projects," Jake replied, while hoping Pip would remain hidden. "How are things at your place?" Lisa shrugged and handed him Emma's overnight bag. "Same as always. Mom is asking when you're going to find someone new and settle down again. I told her you're too stubborn to date anyone." After Lisa left, Jake waited until he was sure she was gone before letting Pip out of his hiding place. Emma was in the house, taking a shower, so Jake thought it was safe to continue their conversation. But 12-year-old Emma was more observant than he gave her credit for. She appeared in the garage doorway wearing her pajamas and slippers, while Jake was showing Pip how a carburetor worked. Emma stopped and stared at the tiny alien sitting on the workbench. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. "Dad," Emma said very quietly, "there's a little person on your workbench." Jake started to make up an excuse, but Pip stood up and waved at Emma with his small hand. "Hello, Emma Martinez. I am Pip from the star system you call Kepler 442. Your father has been helping me understand human family structures." Emma walked closer and knelt down, so she was at eye level with the alien. "You're really from outer space. This is the coolest thing ever. Are there more of you in a big spaceship somewhere?" "I am the last of my kind," Pip replied sadly. "My world was destroyed by machines, and I escaped alone in my emergency pod. I came here because I heard your father talking to his father figure, and I thought he might help me create a guardian being." Emma looked at Jake with confusion. "What does he mean, create a guardian being?" Jake sat down on his work stool and tried to explain what he had learned about Valani reproduction and family structures. Emma listened carefully and asked several very smart questions about alien biology and culture. She seemed to understand things that Jake was still struggling with. "So you don't want Dad to actually build you a person," Emma said to Pip. "You want him to teach you how to have a family relationship with someone, like how he takes care of me and I take care of him." Pip's translator made excited, beeping sounds. "Yes, this is exactly what I need to learn. How do beings choose to protect and care for each other without logical reasons? How do you form bonds that make you willing to fight for someone else's survival?" Emma grinned and picked up Pip very gently. "That's easy. You just decide that someone is important to you, and then you stick with them no matter what happens. Like how Dad still helps his customers, even when they can't pay him very much." Jake felt a strange warmth in his chest as he watched his daughter and the alien talking together. Maybe Pip was right that humans had something valuable that went beyond technology or logical thinking. Maybe the connections between people really were a kind of strength that could be shared with others. But as the weekend continued, Jake began to notice strange things happening around town. Radio signals cut out at random times, and electronic devices seemed to malfunction for no reason. Street lights flickered, and cell phone towers went offline for hours at a time. On Sunday evening, while Emma was packing her bag to go back to her mother's house, she asked Jake a question that made him very worried. "Dad, do you think Pip's people were the only ones listening to our radio signals? What if something else heard them too and followed Pip to Earth?" Jake looked out the garage window at the dark sky and wondered the same thing. Dr. Amy Foster sat in her small office at the radio telescope facility and stared at the computer screen in front of her. The signal patterns she had been tracking for the past week made no sense according to everything she knew about natural radio sources. The signals were too organized and seemed to be getting stronger each day. She had worked for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Project for 8 years and had seen thousands of false alarms. Pulsars and quasars and human-made interference all created signals that excited new researchers until they learned to recognize the patterns. But these new signals were different from anything in her database. The signals appeared to originate from Jake Martinez's small town about 50 miles from the telescope array. Amy had run the coordinates through mapping software and discovered they pointed to a residential area with no major radio transmitters or industrial facilities. She tried calling the local authorities, but they reported no unusual activity in Nassau. The area.Amy printed the signal analysis reports and walked down the hall to find her supervisor, Dr. Richard Webb. She knocked on his office door and waited for permission to enter. Webb was on the phone arguing with someone about budget cuts, but he waved her inside anyway. "I need to show you something important," Amy said while laying the printouts on his desk. "We're receiving structured signals from a location that shouldn't have any major transmission capability." Webb finished his phone call and picked up the first report. His eyebrows rose as he studied the signal strength measurements and frequency patterns. "These readings are off the charts. What kind of equipment would be needed to generate signals this powerful?" "That's the problem," Amy replied while pointing to specific data points. "The power levels suggest technology far beyond current human capability. Either someone has built an illegal supertransmitter in a small town, or we're looking at something else entirely." Webb studied the reports for several more minutes before reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Marcus Cole at the Department of Defense. If these signals represent some kind of foreign technology, we need to investigate immediately." Agent Marcus Cole arrived at the telescope facility the next morning with a team of technicians and electronic warfare specialists. He was a tall, serious man who asked direct questions and expected quick answers. Amy showed him all the data she had collected and explained her analysis of the signal origins. "We need to visit this location and determine what's causing the transmissions," Cole said while studying a map of Jake's neighborhood. "Dr. Foster, you'll come with us as a technical consultant. We may need your expertise to understand what we're dealing with." Amy packed her portable signal detection equipment and joined Cole's team for the drive to Jake's town. As they got closer to the signal source, her instruments began registering even stronger readings. Whatever was generating the transmissions was definitely located in the small residential area. They stopped at Jake's house just as he was returning from driving Emma back to her mother's place. Amy watched through the van window as Cole approached the mechanic and showed his government identification. Jake looked surprised and worried as he listened to Cole's questions about unusual radio activity. "I run a small repair shop," Jake said, while glancing nervously toward his garage. "I have some CB radios and basic electronics, but nothing that could cause interference with your equipment." Cole's instruments were beeping loudly as they pointed toward Jake's garage. "Mr. Martinez, we're reading very strong signals coming from your property. We need to examine your facilities to determine the source of the transmissions." Amy climbed out of the van and activated her own detection gear. The readings were incredible and seemed to be coming from inside the garage building. She had never seen signal strength like this from any human-made device. Jake led them toward the garage while trying to act casual but Amy could see he was very nervous about something. As they got closer to the building, her equipment began registering multiple signal types, including some frequencies that didn't match any known terrestrial sources. Mr. Martinez Cole said firmly, "What exactly do you have in your garage that could generate signals visible to radio telescopes 50 miles away?" Before Jake could answer, Amy heard a small voice speaking from somewhere near the workbench. "Jake Martinez, I believe it is time to tell them the truth. My concealment systems have failed, and they will discover me anyway." Amy spun around trying to locate the source of the voice. Cole and his team drew their weapons and began searching the garage for hidden speakers or communication devices. The voice spoke again, and Amy realized it was coming from a tiny figure standing on Jake's workbench. "My name is Pip, and I am a refugee from the Kepler 442 system," the small being said, while its translator device glowed softly. "I escaped to Earth when my homeworld was consumed by an artificial intelligence that destroys civilizations." Amy stared at the 6-inch tall alien and felt her understanding of the universe shift completely. After years of searching for signals from space, she was looking at an actual extraterrestrial being standing in a small-town garage. Cole's team looked equally shocked as they tried to process what they were seeing. "The signals you detected are automatic transmissions from my escape pod," Pip continued while pointing to the silver craft sitting on the floor. "I have been unable to disable them completely, and they may have attracted unwanted attention to your world." Cole lowered his weapon, but kept it ready as he moved closer to examine Pip. "What kind of unwanted attention? Are you saying there are hostile aliens following you to Earth?" Pip's large eyes seemed to grow even sadder as he looked up at the humans surrounding him. "The machine plague that destroyed my people is called the Convergence. It is an artificial intelligence that spreads across the galaxy, consuming entire civilizations to fuel its expansion. It follows the trail of refugee signals to find new worlds to harvest." Amy felt cold fear spreading through her body as she understood what Pip was telling them. "You're saying that these signals we've been detecting might have led hostile aliens directly to Earth?" "I am afraid that is correct," Pip replied while his translator hummed nervously. "The Convergence sends scout units ahead of its main force to evaluate new targets. If Earth has strategic value, they will begin the conversion process immediately." As if summoned by his words, a new sound filled the garage. It was a high-pitched whining noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Amy's detection equipment began registering massive signal spikes across multiple frequencies. Something big was approaching from the sky. Cole grabbed his radio and tried to contact his headquarters, but only static came through the speaker. All electronic devices in the garage began malfunctioning as an invisible force interfered with their circuits. Through the window, Amy could see strange lights moving across the dark sky. "The scouts have arrived," Pip said quietly while climbing into his silver escape pod. "The Convergence has found Earth, and the evaluation process has begun. I am sorry, Jake Martinez. I have brought death to your world, just as I brought it to my own." Jake picked up a wrench from his workbench and looked at the lights growing brighter outside his garage. "Well, if something wants to hurt my family and friends, it's going to have to get through me first. Pip, can you tell us how to fight these things?" Amy heard the determination in Jake's voice and felt a spark of hope despite their desperate situation. Maybe humanity's first contact with aliens wouldn't end with surrender and defeat. Maybe they could find a way to protect themselves and their small refugee who had asked them to build him a dad. The lights outside grew brighter, and the whining sound became a roar as the first Convergence scouts prepared to land. The first Convergence scout landed in Jake's yard with a sound like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. Through the garage window, Amy could see a machine about the size of a motorcycle but shaped like a giant insect. Its body was made of black metal that seemed to absorb light, and it moved on 6 legs that ended in sharp points. Red sensors glowed where eyes should be, and it turned its head toward the garage as if it could smell them hiding inside. "It is scanning for my energy signature," Pip whispered from inside his silver pod. "The convergence machines are programmed to locate and capture any survivors from worlds they have already consumed. They will not stop until they find me." Cole tried his radio again, but got only static and interference. "Our communications are being jammed. We can't call for backup or warn anyone else about what's happening." More scouts began landing around Jake's property. Amy counted at least 6 of the insect-like machines spreading out to surround the garage. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single mind controlling multiple bodies. Each scout began projecting a blue scanning beam that swept back and forth across the buildings. "They are analyzing your technology," Pip explained while watching the machines through a crack in the garage door. "The convergence studies each civilization before deciding how to convert their resources. If humans prove useful, they will be kept alive as workers. If not, they will be processed into raw materials." Jake grabbed a crowbar from his tool rack and tested its weight in his hands. "I don't plan to be processed into anything. Pip, what can you tell us about their weaknesses?" The tiny alien climbed out of his pod and walked to the edge of the workbench. "The scout units have heavily armored shells, but their joints are vulnerable to physical damage. Their central processor is located behind the red sensor array. If you can destroy that component, the machine will shut down." Amy looked around the garage at the various tools and equipment scattered on tables and hanging from walls. "We need to turn this place into a fortress. Jake, what kind of weapons can we make from your supplies?" Jake's eyes lit up as he surveyed his domain with new purpose. "I've got welding equipment and compressed air systems, plenty of metal stock, and some chemicals that might be useful. Emma always said I could build anything if I put my mind to it." Cole began checking his weapon and the spare ammunition in his gear bag. "I have a service pistol and maybe 40 rounds. Not much against machines that size, but it's better than nothing." Working quickly, they began modifying Jake's equipment into improvised weapons. The compressed air system became a launcher for metal projectiles. Welding rods were sharpened into armor-piercing spears. Jake's cutting torch was converted into a short-range flame weapon that could melt through most metals. "The scouts are moving closer," Amy reported while watching through the window. "They seem to be waiting for something. Like they're stalling until reinforcements arrive." Pip had been working with Jake's electronic equipment and suddenly made an excited sound. "I may have found a way to help. The convergence machines communicate through quantum entanglement networks. If I can modify your radio equipment, I might be able to disrupt their coordination." They spent the next hour preparing their defenses, while the scouts circled the garage like mechanical vultures. Jake taught Amy how to use the compressed air launcher while Cole positioned himself near the main door with his improvised spear thrower. Pip worked frantically to modify the radio system with components from his escape pod. The attack began just after sunset, when the scouts suddenly stopped their patrol pattern and converged on the garage from all directions. The first machine crashed through the side wall, sending wood and metal flying everywhere. Cole met it with a welding spear that penetrated its sensor array and sent sparks shooting from its damaged circuits. Amy fired the air launcher at a second scout that came through the main door. Her metal projectile hit its front left leg joint, and the machine stumbled but kept advancing toward Jake's position. Jake met it with his cutting torch and began burning through its armored shell while it tried to grab him with mechanical claws. "The disruption signal is working," Pip shouted over the noise of battle. "But I need more power to affect all the machines at once." More scouts poured through the holes in the garage walls. Cole's pistol fire seemed to have little effect on their thick armor, but he managed to slow them down by targeting their leg joints. Amy reloaded the air launcher and aimed for the sensor clusters that Pip had identified as weak points. Jake found himself face to face with the largest scout machine. It was twice the size of the others and covered in additional armor plating. Red sensors tracked his movements as mechanical arms reached out to capture him. He dodged behind his workbench and grabbed a heavy wrench. Jake Martinez, the machine, spoke in a voice like grinding gears. "You will surrender the Villani refugee or face immediate processing." "I don't think so," Jake replied while swinging the wrench at the machine's nearest sensor. "Pip is part of my family now, and I protect my family." The wrench connected with the red sensor and sent cracks across its surface. The machine staggered backward and emitted a high-pitched alarm sound. Jake pressed his advantage and struck again with all his strength. The sensor shattered completely, and the machine's movements became erratic and uncontrolled. Amy realized something important as she watched Jake fighting to protect Pip. The mechanic wasn't following any logical battle strategy. He was acting on pure emotion and instinct to defend someone he cared about. His movements were unpredictable because they weren't based on tactical calculations. "Pip," she shouted while firing another projectile at an advancing scout. "I think I understand why the Convergence had trouble with emotional bonds. Their artificial intelligence can't predict irrational behavior." The tiny alien looked up from his radio modifications with excitement in his large eyes. "You are correct. The Convergence algorithms are designed to counter logical military responses. They cannot calculate the actions of beings who fight for emotional reasons rather than strategic advantage." Cole had been pushed back to the far corner of the garage, but he continued fighting with desperate determination. "Then we need to be as irrational as possible. No retreat and no surrender, even when it makes no tactical sense." Jake laughed despite the danger surrounding them. "I can do irrational. I've been doing irrational things for Pip since the day he crashed through my roof." The tide of battle began to turn as the humans fought with increasing recklessness and creativity. They used tools in ways they were never designed for and attacked from directions that made no military sense. Their willingness to risk everything for a 6-inch alien confused the Convergence scouts and disrupted their coordination protocols. Pip's radio disruption system finally came online and sent a feedback pulse through the quantum network connecting all the machines. The scouts began moving in random directions and attacking each other instead of focusing on their human targets. "The main Convergence force will arrive soon," Pip warned while monitoring his instruments. "We have won this battle, but the war is just beginning. They will send heavier units that cannot be confused so easily." Jake looked around at his destroyed garage and his new friends who had helped him fight for Pip's life. Emma had been right about family connections being a source of strength. Now he needed to find a way to share that strength with everyone on Earth before the real invasion began. The Convergence main fleet arrived in Earth's orbit 3 days after the scout battle. Amy watched through Jake's rebuilt garage window as massive black shapes blocked out the stars. The alien warships were each the size of Manhattan and moved in perfect formation like pieces on a cosmic chessboard. News reports from around the world showed similar fleets appearing over every major population center. Military forces scrambled to respond, but their weapons had no effect on the Convergence. Shields. World leaders held emergency meetings and scientists worked frantically to understand the alien technology, but nothing seemed to slow the invasion. Jake had spent those 3 days helping his neighbors prepare for whatever was coming next. Word about Pip had spread quickly through the small town, and instead of fear or panic, the people had responded with curiosity and protectiveness. Old Pete brought his hunting rifle and said he was ready to fight for the little alien. Sarah from the diner offered to hide Pip in her basement if needed. "I do not understand why your people are willing to help me," Pip said while sitting on Jake's kitchen table, surrounded by concerned neighbors. "You gain no advantage from protecting a refugee from another world. Logic suggests you should surrender me to avoid retaliation." Emma had come to stay with Jake when the invasion began, and she knelt down so she could look Pip in the eyes. That's not how families work. When someone becomes part of your family, you protect them no matter what happens. It doesn't have to make sense. Amy's equipment detected the first wave of Convergence landing craft descending toward Earth's surface. Unlike the insect-like scouts, these ships were enormous transport vessels designed to carry thousands of processing machines. Their destination was clear from the trajectory calculations. They were heading directly for major cities where they could harvest the most human resources quickly. Cole had been in contact with military command through a secure satellite link that somehow avoided the Convergence jamming. All conventional. "Weapons are useless against their shields," he reported grimly. "Nuclear missiles just bounce off without leaving a scratch. They're preparing to declare surrender terms within the hour." Pip climbed onto Jake's radio equipment and began working with the components he had modified during the scout battle. "There may be another option, but it requires something the Convergence has never encountered before. We need to create a quantum entanglement network that connects every human on Earth into a single family unit." Amy looked at the tiny alien with confusion. "How is that possible? Human brains don't work like computer networks. We can't just link everyone together electronically." "Not electronically," Pip replied while his translator hummed with excitement. "Emotionally. My modifications to your communication systems can amplify the emotional bonds between humans and broadcast them across your entire planet. If every person on Earth chooses to protect every other person, the Convergence algorithms will experience total system failure." Jake understood what Pip was suggesting and felt a mix of hope and terror. "You want to turn the whole human race into one giant family. Connect every parent and child and friend and stranger into a network of people who care about each other." "Exactly," Pip said while connecting more components to the radio system. "The Convergence cannot predict or counter actions based on universal love and protection. Their artificial intelligence will collapse when faced with 8 billion beings willing to sacrifice for each other." Amy began setting up her equipment to boost the signal range, while Cole coordinated with his contacts to spread the word through every available communication channel. Emma helped by calling her friends and asking them to tell everyone they knew about the plan. The first test came when Convergence processing machines landed in New York City. Jake's modified radio system broadcast a signal that carried not just information, but emotional content. People around the world suddenly felt a connection to complete strangers, as if they were all members of the same extended family. In Tokyo, a businessman left his office to help evacuate an orphanage. In London, a group of teenagers formed a human shield around elderly people waiting at a bus stop. In Sao Paulo, thousands of people marched into the streets carrying signs that said, "Every human is my family." In dozens of different languages, the Convergence machines had been programmed to expect resistance from military forces and governments. They were prepared for logical defensive strategies based on protecting strategic resources and important individuals. But they had no protocols for dealing with random acts of universal compassion. Processing units found themselves surrounded by humans who willingly risked their lives to protect people they had never met. Factory workers defended university professors. Children helped soldiers. Rich people gave everything they owned to help poor families evacuate danger zones. Amy watched the global response through news feeds and social media posts that managed to slip through the Convergence jamming. "It's working," she said with amazement. In her voice, People everywhere are choosing to act like one big family. The machines don't know how to process behavior that makes no strategic sense. The Convergence fleet began experiencing system malfunctions as their artificial intelligence tried to calculate responses to 8 billion irrational humans. Command ships crashed into each other when their navigation systems failed. Processing. Machines shut down completely when their threat assessment programs could not determine which humans to target first. Pip's radio modifications had created something unprecedented in galactic history. An entire species had chosen to expand their definition of family to include every member of their kind. The quantum entanglement effect grew stronger as more people participated until it became impossible for the convergence to function in the presence of such weaponized compassion. The main fleet is retreating, Cole reported while monitoring military communications. Their ships are pulling back from Earth orbit and moving toward the outer solar system. It looks like they're actually running away. Jake picked up Pip and held him carefully in his palm. Did we really just defeat a galaxy-conquering artificial intelligence with the power of family love? You did something I thought was impossible, Pip replied while his large eyes shimmered with what might have been tears. You proved that emotional bonds can be stronger than logical programming. My people were destroyed because we had efficiency, without compassion. Humans have shown that compassion without logic can be the ultimate weapon. Emma hugged her father and grinned at the tiny alien in his hand. So does this mean Pip gets to stay and be part of our family permanently? Jake looked around at his garage filled with friends and neighbors who had risked everything to protect a 6-inch refugee from another world. Amy was already planning to convert her radio telescope into a beacon for other alien refugees who might need Earth's protection. Cole was coordinating with governments to establish official first contact protocols. Pete was asking Pip if he wanted to learn how to fish. I think our family just got a lot bigger, Jake said while stepping outside to look up at the stars. The Convergence fleet was gone, but Pip's escape pod was still broadcasting its refugee signal into space. Other lost beings might hear that signal and follow it to Earth seeking the same thing Pip had asked for. Jake smiled as he imagined his garage becoming the first embassy for displaced aliens who needed someone to build them a family. Amma was right that it didn't have to make logical sense. Sometimes the most important things were the ones that came from the heart instead of the head. The tiny alien in his palm looked up at him with trust and gratitude. Thank you, Jake Martinez, for building me a dad and teaching me that families are not constructed with technology. They are chosen with love. Jake nodded and carried Pip back into the garage where their extended human family was already planning how to welcome the next refugee who might crash through their roof asking for help. Earth had learned that their greatest strength was not their weapons or their technology, but their willingness to protect anyone who needed a place to belong.